And just to the south, America's most famous bridge connects Brooklyn to Manhattan.
The Brooklyn Bridge spans the East River and today connects the boroughs of Brooklyn and Manhattan. When it was completed in 1883, it was the first physical span to connect the largest city in America, New York, which was then just the island of Manhattan, and the third largest city in America, Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Bridge today ranks 91st in the world in terms of longest suspension bridges. When it was finished, it was by far the longest in the world.
It is a 130-year-old New York icon, providing passage to tens of thousands of vehicles and pedestrians each day. When it was built, the bridge was considered one of the great projects of its time, back when much of modern Brooklyn was farmland.
The bridge took 14 years to complete. The era we're talking about, from 1869 to 1883, featured church steeples and brownstones as your typical skyline elements. So if you look behind me, take a mental eraser and wipe off every skyscraper you see. The towers behind me, which are identical and represent monuments to the two great cities the bridge was connecting, were the tallest things, not just on either side of the river. They were the tallest things in the Western Hemisphere.
But this massive construction project didn't come without challenges. On the Brooklyn side, workers reached rock 13 meters below water. On the Manhattan side, it was much deeper. And it was here, working in caissons underwater, that problems began.
Below 50 feet, the air pressure was so great that when their 8-hour shift was over and they climbed back up the ladder, a lot of them collapsed once they reached the surface. In other extreme cases, they crumbled in excruciating pain that started in their joints. The pain was so severe, people started calling it the bends because they didn't know what to do with their limbs from the severe pain.
The bends was caused by the rapid change in pressure from deep beneath the river to the surface. In later years, the condition would be known as decompression sickness.
And of course, this is the era before workers' comp and Social Security and life insurance and all the other safety nets we have today. So these poor immigrants fresh off the boat, working for $2 a day, were literally risking their lives, and little did they know that some of them would die from a disease they could not have predicted.
And that was just below the water. Above the surface, the work was just beginning.
Once they built the anchorages, they were also at the same time building these giant stone towers made out of limestone and granite. Once the towers are complete, they can actually start spinning the cable.
On the bridge today, the fruits of all those efforts can be seen.
What's incredible, besides the views, is the fact that you can actually connect with history, because here I'm touching one of the 4 main suspension cables. And the great thing about steel is it can last pretty much indefinitely as long as you prevent moisture from seeping in and corroding the metal. So even though it's been resurfaced numerous times, if you can cut this open, the original 19 strands have never been replaced. And there's about 3,500 miles of little steel wire strands within each of the 4 suspension cables. One of the main innovative features of this incredible suspension bridge are actually these diagonal stays. The diagonal stays are technically not necessary in the sense that if I were to cut them off, the bridge would not collapse. They create additional redundancies. They create a much higher margin of safety. They keep this bridge stiff and prevent it from swaying.
More than a century later, the Brooklyn Bridge remains a dependable mode of transportation for Brooklyn residents and Manhattanites, and stands as a great symbol of America.
The Brooklyn Bridge symbolizes New York and New Yorkers. We're tough, we're resilient. It was considered the unbuildable bridge at the time, and they surmounted insurmountable obstacles to build what was then the longest span in the world. And while a lot of people were predicting it would collapse the first time it would carry a weight, it's still standing 132 years later. And speaking of tenacity, the chief engineer who designed the bridge, which was going to be his crowning work, actually died before the construction was scheduled to begin, and his son took over. And the son became an invalid 3 years into the process. And the son's wife helped him finish the bridge. If that's not a New York story, I don't know what is.